Coming up on New Day at Arirang, the worst day of the pandemic yet. South Korea forecast to announce its highest ever daily total of COVID-19 cases, well in excess of 3,000. The number of seriously ill also straining health services. South Korea says it'll join numerous other large economies to take part in the Biden administration's decision to untap strategic crude reserves. It's hoped the move will bring down rapidly rising energy prices. Plus, BTS nominated for the Best Pop Duo or Group Performance at the Grammy Awards. Another remarkable achievement for the K-pop band, just days after scooping the top award at the American Music Awards.
Good morning and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. Wednesday, November 24th in Seoul, South Korea. I'm Kim Mo-gen.
And I'm Mark Broom. It's wonderful to have you with us as we head into the middle of the week. Over the next hour, we're going to take a look at the big news stories of the day and get some expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world.
And we start with the latest on the coronavirus situation in South Korea. The country is forecast to reach a grim milestone today as daily infections are expected to hit an all-time high nearing 4,000 cases. Officials say they will review implementing emergency plans if the situation continues to head towards its breaking point.
For more on this and other related updates, joining us in the studio is Chairman Jung. Good morning.
Morning.
Daily infections, as Mo-gyun just mentioned, are skyrocketing. The weekend effect that we normally see with lower cases towards the start of the work week diminishing.
Right, so South Korea is expected to see a record high number of infections today. From midnight to 9 p.m. on Tuesday, the country reported more than 3,500 cases. This is already surpassing the all-time high figure set last week, which was close to 3,300. And like you said, figures tend to climb up as we get further into the week because fewer tests are done over the weekend. But even when taking this into account, it's still a huge jump. The capital Seoul saw a record-breaking figure with more than 1,500 cases. And outside the capital area, a major cluster infection broke out at a religious settlement in Chungcheongnam-do province. Since Sunday, over 230 people have contracted the virus, and it turned out 92% of the people were not vaccinated.
Now, Min-jung, not only we're seeing high number of infections, but we're also seeing high number of critical ill patients. How are authorities dealing to solve this problem?
Right, so health authorities are currently considering the implementation of their emergency plan if the current situation worsens. So if the emergency plans come into effect, the measures for a gradual return to normal will be suspended and strict social distancing rules will likely return. Health experts are urging authorities to quickly hit the brakes to prevent further resurgences, saying that the further loosening of the current eased measures under level 2 seems unlikely. However, for now, officials say there is no immediate need to enact an emergency plan despite the difficulties it's facing securing hospital beds.
One of the ways the government is trying to tackle this situation is ramping up its vaccination campaign. The vast majority of adults have already been fully vaccinated in South Korea, but how is this process moving along for those in the younger age brackets?
So teenagers aged 12 to 17 are once again able to book their COVID-19 vaccines. The initial round of reservation has ended, but the government has decided to allow more bookings from Tuesday as students are returning to classrooms. The decision also comes as the risk of infection among younger people has been increasing. Over the past 5 days, more than 1,700 students from kindergarten to high school contracted COVID-19. With the easing of restrictions, which started earlier this month, daily student infections surpassed the 500 mark for the very first time. So those who have not yet gotten shots will be able to make reservations until the end of this year.
Now, Min-jung, while the domestic front is under pressure, we hear that there's some good news for those traveling abroad.
Right, so South Koreans traveling to Saipan will no longer have to go through quarantine upon arrival. Starting December 12th, South Koreans arriving in the island will be exempt from the 5-day hotel quarantine. And of course, this is only applied to those who have been fully vaccinated. South Korea and Saipan formed a travel bubble agreement in June, but quarantine was still a must. Another country that is part of South Korea's travel bubble agreement is Singapore. Since last week, when the first group of Singaporean travelers came to South Korea since the outbreak of the pandemic, more than 1,000 Singaporeans have visited the country.
Well, that indeed is some good news. Now, thank you so much for your report. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the World Health Organization is warning the COVID-19 death toll in Europe could top 2.2 million by next spring, saying 700,000 more people could die on the continent over the winter period.
The UN agency's stark warning comes as many European countries are grappling with skyrocketing infections. Kim Hyo-san tells us more.
As many European countries battle skyrocketing COVID-19 cases, the WHO warns the continent could see 700,000 more COVID-19 related deaths by March 2022, in addition to the 1.5 million that have already died. It also expects high or extreme stress in intensive care units in most European countries between now and early March. As Europe grapples with the surge, Austria returned to lockdown this week, while Germany and the Netherlands are poised to announce new restrictions. With daily new cases hovering around 50,000 for the past several days, Germany even logged more than 63,000 new cases on Saturday alone. The UK reported over 40,000 new cases on Sunday, taking the 7-day total to over 287,000, a 9.4% rise over the previous week. France recorded more than 30,000 new infections on Tuesday for the first time since August. Europe's return to the pandemic's epicenter has been largely blamed on the sluggish vaccine uptake in some nations, the colder weather, and the easing of restrictions. To this end, EU ministers met Tuesday to discuss the deployment of booster shots.
The pandemic developments in the European Union worldwide are still dramatic. One thing is clear, vaccination saves lives. But the vaccination quota in too many member states of the European Union, unfortunately also in Germany, is too low. So now is the time to finally talk about it.
The BBC says there are plenty of reasons to believe Britain will escape the worst of what's hitting mainland Europe, citing several reasons, including its swift vaccination rollout, high booster inoculation rate, and the timing of its easing of restrictions. The BBC also said it was better to have the virus rebound, or the so-called exit wave, in the summer. It adds this enabled the country to mitigate the spread thanks to the warmer weather that prompted people to spend more time outdoors and to avoid the winter crunch when pressure on the UK's health system increases across the board. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
The Biden administration has announced the United States will release millions of barrels of oil reserves in a bid to slow the rapid rise in fuel prices. South Korea is joining the U.S.-led move along with other major oil-consuming nations. Bae Eun-ji has the story.
With gas prices last month soaring to a 7-year high, the U.S. is rolling up its sleeves in an effort to bring the price down. The White House said Tuesday local time that it will release 50 million barrels of oil from its reserves as part of a global effort to bring down soaring energy prices. The move is being taken in coordination with other major oil-consuming nations, including South Korea, China, Japan, India, and the UK. South Korea's Ministry of Energy and Foreign Affairs said in a joint statement that it has decided to accept the U.S. request, considering the rapid rise in global oil prices, the importance of the U.S.-Korea alliance, and the participation of other major countries. The ministries added further details regarding the amount and timing have not been decided yet, but said it is likely to be similar to the level previously released by the nation at the request of the International Energy Agency in 2011, when Libya's oil production was disrupted by civil unrest. The government said that in this case, under IEA standards, there is enough domestic oil reserve to last over 100 days, so it will not affect the domestic oil supply, even in an emergency scenario. The global move comes after the OPEC group of oil-producing nations, including Saudi Arabia and Russia, repeatedly ignored calls from U.S. President Joe Biden, asking to rapidly boost production. OPEC struck to an agreement to only increase production gradually, saying it is concerned about a resurgence of COVID-19 cases driving down demand, as happened at the peak of the pandemic. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
The U.S. and Taiwan held a second meeting on Tuesday of their new annual economic dialogue aimed at forging closer ties. Held under increased pressure from China, the 5-hour-long U.S.-Taiwan Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue touched supply chain resilience, science and technology, digital economy, and 5G. Taiwan's Economic Affairs Minister said they agreed to promote supply chain security and to cooperate on pharmaceuticals, health, clean energy, as well as semiconductors. China slammed the meeting, calling it a betrayal of President Biden's recent pledge to not encourage Taiwan independence. Samsung Electronics is to build its new U.S.-based chip plant in Texas. The South Korean company is likely to decide on the city of Taylor for constructing the $17 billion plant. Texas Governor Greg Abbott is expected to include news of the deal in his economic announcement set for Tuesday local time. The Wall Street Journal reports that Taylor offered Samsung hefty tax incentives, including breaks in property tax of up to 92.5% for the first 10 years. The plant will produce advanced logic chips for contract manufacturing, foundry, and Samsung's businesses. The plant is expected to create around 1,800 new jobs.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. It's widely expected the Bank of Korea will announce in the coming hours that interest rates are going up again. Analysts expect the belt tightening to continue into 2022, as well as policymakers try to rein in skyrocketing housing prices and inflation. The spiking cost of consumer goods is causing this vicious cycle in which already heavily indebted households are just borrowing more and more just to try and keep a pace with the inflationary pressures.
The prevailing theory is, with inflation hitting a high not seen in 10 years last month, South Korea's central bank has no choice but to act, or inflation could rapidly spin out of control. For more on this, we connect to Professor Oh Jun-seok from Sookmyung Women's University School of Business. Good morning, Professor.
Thank you for having me back.
Now, the BOK will almost certainly announce that the rate will go up 25 basis points to 1%. Do you think this will have the desired effect, namely easing inflation and housing prices?
I suppose so in some degree, and there is no other choice, as you mentioned, the BOK, to press down the inflation pressure, so long as Federal Reserve keeps tapering. We already know that inflation is overall price increase in the economy. It's a mirror image of decreasing money value. What's going on? Capital flight in the capital market moves its direction toward the real estate market and gold market, soaring up the housing price and gold price. Hiking interest rate takes the role of a vacuum cleaner, absorbing money inflated in a balloon of economy. 25 basis point hike is just a level 1, and we'll shift up level 2 and level 3 sequentially to adjust for the market responses. What is worried people changing the level of is household debt that outweighs its GDP, as the GDP growth rate is growth rate of the household debt is bigger worry. Speed really matters. Snowballing household debt can hurt country's financial stability. Korea's household debt to GDP ratio was 104.2% in the second quarter. Hong Kong was the next 92%, Britain at 89.4%, and the United States at 79.2%. Korea is the only country with household debt outside the economy. Also, absorbing liquidity in this way by means of raising interest rate will continue afterwards.
Now, Professor, all signs point to more rate hikes next year as well. Do you have an expectation on just how high the rate will go percentage-wise by the end of 2022? And could you explain, as best as you can in layman terms, what higher rates mean for the average household?
It is a good question to ask, but very hard to answer. I'd like to answer in 2 points. First, absolute number of interest rate means little. U.S. Fed rate is 0.25% and BOK reference rate is 0.75%. What matters is interest rate gap between the two countries. I mean the difference between 0.75 and 0.25, 50 basis point. When Fed in the United States moves interest rate, BOK follows to keep the gap 50 basis point. Although there could be a time-lapse adjustment, it might be a long story to explain why makes this. But simply speaking, just because Korea is export-oriented and international investor-oriented open economy, financial stability should be kept from the perspectives of global investors or global trade. So when the gap loses its balance, interest rate parity condition breaks, foreign exchange market goes into crunch zone. So one thing we have to know, another is that if you are a salaried everyday worker, higher rate means higher austerity in your daily living in relation to pay more interest on your household debt. And if you are investors, higher rate means marginal rate of investment goes up, which in turn decrease investment or portfolio rebalancing into contraction. It might touch the vicious cycle of economic recession again. In prior to the cycle of decreasing investment, production, and employment, countervailing big project should be provided by the government. This is why Biden administration pushed for the infrastructure investment plan at this moment, and Korea might be the same situation. So the Korean government should provide some kind of big project.
And before we let you go, Professor, numerous administrations in South Korea have tried to cool housing prices. It seems like very few have worked. Do you think Korea's property market could crash in the near future? And if you don't see that happening yet, what implications would a crash have for the wider economy?
It is also hard to tell, but the market dynamic adjustment themselves for a variety of contingent economic changes. So government policy targeted for one purpose could only be ended up in another chance of speculation due to government failure. Government failure is much bigger and severer than market failure. Overall house price in economics could be an indicator of growth of economy, measurement of aggregate amount of purchasing power. Whether or not Korea's property market crash depends on the outlook of the Korean economy. So long as the Korean economy forecasts the economic growth, it means that the tendency of house price hike will continue. If Korean property market crash happen, it might be a yield sign, which might be caused by the sluggish of economic outlook. Does it make sense when the government to choose the economic policy just for the reason to catch the house price hike, which means take the economic policy of sluggish? This is a policy dilemma. So the problem lies not in the house price increase, but at the speed of price hike. When it is too fast for salaried workers to bear the burden, it can bring out economic uncertainty in the market due to speculation with high leverage, which means overweight on the bank loan. This makes every reason for a government to intervene in the market transaction directly. And then until now, visible hand of government has been coarse, and the most of the popular speculators in the property market. And so at this time, what I say is just restoring market autonomy in the real estate market would be rather be the second best choices.
All right. Professor Oh, thank you so much. We appreciate your insights as always. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Former South Korean President Chun Doo-hwan, who seized power of the country in a 1979 military coup and ruled for around 8 years, died on Tuesday at the age of 90. He was the last of South Korea's 3 military generals turned presidents to die. Lee Kyung-eun reports.
Chun Doo-hwan, former South Korean president and army general, died on Tuesday morning at the age of 90. The authoritarian leader reportedly fainted in the bathroom of his home in West Seoul. he had been battling multiple myeloma, a type of bone marrow cancer. Chun rose to power in a military coup in December 1979 alongside his army friend Roh Tae-woo after their mentor, the dictator Park Chung-hee, was assassinated. In the following year, his military faction suppressed the pro-democracy movement in the southern city of Gwangju. The bloody crackdown remains the darkest event in the country's modern history. But some supporters credit him for leading economic growth and Seoul's winning bid to host the 1988 Olympics. Following his presidency from 1980 to 1988, Chun turned over his power to his friend Roh. Decades of military rule ended when the civilian president Kim Young-sam took office, who convicted them on treason and corruption charges. The court imposed the death penalty on Chun in his first trial. However, this was later commuted to life imprisonment. Both Chun and Roh were pardoned by President Kim in 1997. But in 2019, Chun made another court appearance, this time on charges of defaming victims of the Gwangju pro-democracy movement in his memoir. He attended an appeals court hearing in August, just 3 months before he passed away. And Chun's death comes just 28 days after Roh passed away on October 26th. However, unlike other former presidents, a law disqualifies the two military leaders from being buried at the National Cemetery due to their convictions for treason. As for state funerals, there is no specific protocol in regard to what should be done in cases such as this. Roh was given a 5-day state funeral, but a family funeral is planned for Chun. In his memoir, which is technically considered his will, Chun expressed that he wanted his remains to be buried on frontline high ground overlooking North Korean territory, so that he could see the unified two Koreas should the day ever come. 이경은, Arirang News.
Business sentiment among South Korean firms in November remained unchanged from the month before. The Bank of Korea on Wednesday said the business sentiment index for all industries this month was 86, the same as October. The reading is under 100, meaning there are more pessimists about the economy than optimists. The central bank says this was largely due to rising raw material prices and disruptions to global supply chains. By sector, BSI among manufacturers stayed at 90, while sentiment among non-manufacturing businesses edged down a point on month to 83. The South Korean government plans to provide almost $11 billion to support small business owners and sectors hit hardest by pandemic-linked restrictions. The finance minister says the measures will be drawn up to target areas that didn't receive adequate compensation in earlier rounds. Min Suk-hyun with the details.
Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi has announced additional plans to help people's livelihoods in the pandemic-hit economy. More than $10 billion of support was discussed during a policy meeting early Tuesday morning. The funds will be drawn from excess tax revenue collected this year and from the state budget. Hong specifically pinpointed areas where the money would be used.
The $10.7 billion plus alpha measure will include business support for losses due to COVID-19, employment support for vulnerable groups, and efforts to stabilize prices and support disease prevention measures.
The government will provide $9 billion of tailored support for businesses that have suffered losses due to the pandemic. Most of it will be injected into sectors that have previously not been covered by the state compensation scheme. This means travel agencies and lodging facilities can now get some of the financial support they need, including subsidies and low-interest loans. The latest measures will also include ways to stabilize inflation and support virus prevention efforts, with plans such as expanding the workforce at COVID-19 health centers. Hong also said that the government plans to extend a cut in the consumption tax on car purchases by another 6 months to boost domestic demand. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines.
With the ongoing global pandemic, a supply chain crisis and a rise in prices of materials, economies around the world are recovering slower than hoped. The Korean economy is also recovering modestly as exports and investments have been limited by the weak global environment. There are also troubles at home as rising levels of household debt and inequality threaten the strength of economic growth in the long run. We discuss these issues and more with Jon Pareliussen, an economist at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. A very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I believe you're in South Korea right now in the central city of Sejong. How are you today?
Yes, I'm fine, a bit jet lagged and quarantining until I get my test result. But other than that, everything's good. Thank you.
Right, it's great to have you on our show. And, well, what's been making headlines recently is South Korea's level of household debt. Now, that's also provided the backdrop for the Netflix hit series Squid Game, as you might know. And household debt in South Korea is actually growing at the fastest rate out of all 38 OECD countries. And it's in fact reached the point where debt now exceeds more than double the net household disposable income. What do you see as the fundamental problem?
Well, it has to do fundamentally with the housing market, and falling interest rates combined with the shortage of dwellings led to rising prices, and this leads to higher debt. And this is common to many OECD countries. But at the same time, households have boosted their assets, and fewer are behind on their loans than before the crisis. Banks have fairly strong buffers, much thanks to lending regulations, which are among the strictest in the OECD. So this said, it is a concern when debt is high and growing fast. It is one of the main vulnerabilities we see to economic growth in Korea. But the risk is when people buy houses because they expect prices to continue rising. And in this case, a shift in sentiment can lead to a correction, which can be difficult for people, and it can reduce economic growth as people become more careful with their spending.
And you're right, there has been so much nervousness around housing prices, which have been shooting up at incredible rates. And while the current government, it's drawn up, in fact, at least 24 measures to curb these housing prices, which is, of course, as you pointed out, strongly associated with household debt. But these measures have failed to work. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think after massive house building in the early 90s, policy has much more focused on taming housing demand. For example, by putting limits to how much people can borrow as a share of the house value and as a share of their income. And these regulations are now among the toughest in the OECD. So going forward, I think it's important to focus on how you can increase supply, how you can build more. But even though the government takes this seriously, it takes time. Price tensions are likely to remain for a period, but they should be contained by continued financial regulations, what we call macroprudential measures. And also, I think there's a discussion about monetary policy. When the Bank of Korea has started raising rates to respond partially to housing prices and household debt, I think it may be a good idea to signal that rates will not stay low forever. But it's also important that this reason does not come in the way of price stability, which is the main goal of monetary policy.
Right, and while many countries have gone to near zero rates, and while right now, compared to the global financial crisis when most countries thought austerity was the answer, many OECD nations have actually implemented massive stimulus plans to keep their economies afloat during the course of this pandemic and also build back better. But of course, someone needs to pay the bill. Do you think the taxpayer should be worried?
I think it's always good to worry a little bit, but I don't think the taxpayer should worry too much about that right now, because right now we have a pandemic we need to get out of, and massive stimulus was the right medicine to reduce the permanent economic damage from this pandemic. And this medication needs to continue until the patient is up and running and paying taxes, you know. And Korea is in a really good state with public debt well below half of GDP, which is very favorable compared to most OECD countries.
And well, your organisation has quite a number of rankings, really. And well, South Korea tends to be on either end of extremes when it comes to those rankings, not all of them good. And well, the country has the fastest ageing society in the world, with the lowest birth rates of less than 0.9 children born per woman, so not even one child. And while the least productive work hours also, according to your organisation, and while the list goes on. So it's clear that we're facing this productivity time bomb here in South Korea. How is this going to affect the country's economic growth in the long run?
I think the situation with aging is very serious. And you are right that increasing productivity, which means producing more for less, is part of the solution. But it's not enough. You need people to do the jobs, as an increasing share of your population retire, and they need health services, they need old age care. And you have the people to do these jobs, but you don't use them. You have Korean women, they are forced to choose between having a family and having a career. So this is about attitudes towards women and gender roles. It's about long working days. Again, productivity, efficient working time. It's about the unhealthy competition to get your children into the best universities. And in this situation, who can afford to have more than one child? So I think the day that Korean women can realistically combine a full-time job with having 2 or even 3 children, that day you won't have an aging problem anymore. And this is not a women's issue. It's not a women's fight. It's an issue for all. It's an issue for the economy. It's an issue for men who care about their wives, care about their children, and would probably appreciate spending more time with them.
And well, it's clear that the focus should be on achieving balanced growth. I mean, it's undeniable that South Korea did see a amazing rate of growth over the last few decades. But while right now we have a very high level of relative poverty, the 4th in the world, following Costa Rica, the United States, and Israel, according to the OECD. And well, how do these so-called advanced economies have such large disparities when it comes to income?
What these countries have in common is that they have a large dispersion of earnings, of wages, and this reflects, at least to an extent, that there's a large dispersion of productivity between firms. So high productivity firms, they pay more, like the chaebol here in Korea, and the low productivity firms pay less. Another thing these countries have in common is that they redistribute relatively little. So stronger social transfers reduce inequality in many, especially in European countries, quite strongly. But they need to be financed. So these countries also tax more. And the tax take is relatively low in Korea, so you could say that it's possible to redistribute more, but it's of course not a very popular policy.
Well, what would you recommend further in order for the country, South Korea that is, to see balanced economic growth?
Apart from gender equality and shared productivity across the economy, Korea needs to speed up its green transition. You have set tough targets, but you have also shown in the past that you can reinvent yourself. You can reduce your own emissions and you can export your solutions to the world. But this is not something the government can fix by increasing spending. You need to give businesses a good reason to develop zero carbon solutions, and you need to give people a good reason to save energy and go green. And how do you do that? Well, you make it cheaper to be green, and you make it more expensive to pollute. And the good news is that you already have a very good instrument in place to make this happen. You have an up and running emissions trading scheme that can take you there. It needs to be fine-tuned, the cap needs to be tightened, and fewer allowances needs to be given to businesses for free. This is to give the right incentive to propel these businesses into inventing the solutions and implementing them. Yeah.
Right, so well, we did see a very ambitious plan by the government to take us into a greener future, and hopefully it will be able to implement the kind of helpful nudges that businesses need in order to get to that future. And well, amid geopolitical conflicts, the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, and the ongoing supply chain crisis, how should South Korea, which is so dependent on exports, really safeguard itself against external uncertainties as well as trade disruptions?
Well, as you say, Korea is an export-oriented economy, so the answer is really simple. What you need to continue the miracle on the Han River is more openness, more cooperation, and more multilateralism. And the OECD is, of course, always ready to support in this. So this is the more robust strategy: diversify globally and do not isolate, go towards isolation.
Well, that is a worrying trend that we're actually seeing around the world. Economies becoming a little more protectionist, and well, that's one of the concerns that this country is facing, I suppose, with us being so trade dependent. But well, in terms of going forward, what are your projections for South Korea's GDP growth next year? Which areas are you particularly optimistic about, to end this interview on a lighter note?
Yeah, well, Korea is doing well, and we will publish a new forecast the 1st of December. So I cannot share our exact forecast, but I can say that our assessment has not changed that much since our last projection, which was that the growth will be 4% in 2021 and around 3% next year. And of course, the rapid vaccination campaign is a huge success and a key driver of your positive outlook. And we see consumption strengthening, and that's what drives the rebound as restrictions are lifted and you move towards the containment strategy to a living with COVID strategy. I think there can be some bumps in the road, especially during the winter season when COVID spreads more easily, despite high rates of vaccination. But the direction of travel is clear. It's towards more vaccination, more immunity, less restrictions, and more growth.
And just before we go, you've seen the explosive popularity of Korean cultural content such as the Netflix series Squid Game or K-pop band BTS. Do you see a potential future? Do you see a potential for Korean cultural content as perhaps one of its new sort of export areas?
Well, I think you are already there, and you can only go stronger. My girls, they love BTS, and I'm a huge fan of Squid Game, so I think you do a lot of promising stuff, and I'm sure we'll see. I'm looking forward to the next season and a lot of more Korean content going forward.
Right, well, there are many structural problems that South Korea needs to deal with, but hopefully we can look to a brighter future and a faster than expected recovery. Fingers crossed there. And well, thank you so much for your time today. That was Jon Pareliussen, an economist at the OECD. Thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you.
After winning big at the American Music Awards, BTS have been nominated for a Grammy, the top honor in popular music. Despite expectations, though, they're not contending for any of the four main or general fields, including Record of the Year. Han Sung-woo with the details.
For the second year in a row, the Recording Academy has officially named K-pop juggernaut BTS a nominee for the Best Pop Duo or Group Performance Prize at the Grammy Awards. The boy band's hit single Butter, which spent a total of 10 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, will be competing against the likes of Coldplay's Higher Power and Justin Bieber and Benny Blanco's Lonely for the honor. The winner to be announced at the awards ceremony in Los Angeles on January 31st. If they win, the group will go down in history as the first Korean act in popular music to take home a Golden Gramophone. BTS's Grammy nomination this year comes just days after the boy band bagged 3 awards at the American Music Awards, including the top prize, Artist of the Year, catapulting themselves to the top of the US music industry. So expectations were high, but the group was not nominated for the prestigious Record of the Year, nor any other of the Grammy's 4 main or general fields, proving once again the award ceremony's traditional focus on artistry rather than commercial performance. Nominees are determined by eligible voting members of the Recording Academy, comprised of music industry experts and professionals, like artists, producers, sound engineers, and critics. Members finished their first round of votes early this month and are awaiting the final round, set to start December 6th and close a month later. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
The Korean Netflix smash hit series Squid Game has become a sensation around the world, helping write a new chapter in the short history of the streaming contents industry. Now, could another South Korean series be about to launch to similar levels of international fame? The show, called Hellbound, debuted #1 on the day of its global premiere. Yoon-jin has more on the show that's turning heads around the world.
Even before its release, Hellbound was dubbed another Squid Game, with fans greatly anticipating the show's debut. The latest webtoon-based fantasy horror K-drama features a society that falls into chaos as people are notified of the exact time of their deaths as supernatural creatures show up to take them to hell when the time comes. Its subject matter deals with universal themes like life and death, crime and punishment, and how we're supposed to live our lives.
I think the setting hell is very extreme, which also makes it a good setting to show the many different kinds of humans.
According to data by streaming analytics firm Flix Patrol, Hellbound became the most watched TV show in just 24 hours after its global premiere, a feat that took Squid Game 8 days to reach. Hellbound topped the charts in 24 countries, including Belgium, Hong Kong, Jamaica, Mexico, and Saudi Arabia, while it came in second in 17 countries, including Denmark, France, India, and Brazil, and third in the US, Canada, and Turkey. Squid Game may have been bumped from the top spot, but South Korea has 3 shows in Netflix's top 10 global rankings.
We all know that after Korean sensations like Parasite and BTS, there has been an increase in global interest for K-content. Korean projects really reflect society.
Experts say that the explosive initial popularity is mostly due to an increased interest in Korean shows after the smash hit Squid Game, while Netflix serves as a medium for the further expansion of Hallyu, the Korean wave. Yoon-jin, Arirang News.
Intergenerational tension has become one of the most pressing issues in South Korea's corporate culture, so much so that there is a slang word for stubborn authority figures that students sometimes use that's now being used much more widely these days by adults who work your 9-to-5 jobs. Kim Sung-min reports.
Do you know someone who is older than you, who is condescending and believes he or she is always right and that you're always wrong? In Korea, there's a word to describe exactly the type of person. 꼰대. While 건대 was first student slang to label stubborn and strict teachers, it's now widely used outside the classroom, especially within offices full of workers from different generations. In fact, in a survey, 9 in 10 employees said 건대 behavior happens at their workplaces. From ignoring others' opinions and always talking about back in my day to being forceful and asking younger workers to endure hardships, 건대 behavior often creates generational tension. To address this, a panel of 4 leaders from different companies sat together on Tuesday for a table discussion hosted by American Chamber of Commerce in Korea. There, the panel said that 건대 is not just about age.
It isn't necessarily to do with age. It's more of a mindset. If somebody is very rigid in their views, unwilling to listen to other people's opinions, unwilling to try new things.
So how should potential 건대s out there change? The president of Qualcomm Korea says self-recognition is key.
I'm 건대, and that's the beginning of good relationship with employees. The worst 건대 is self-denying 건대. So you have to admit it. And once you admit you are 건대, then the MZ generation, they listen to.
Also highlighted in the discussion was the need to not simply write off older workers, as they also bring value to the company.
They have experience with the same company. They know the customers. They know the suppliers. And when you have the right teamwork, I think that is what makes it a very optimum type of an organization.
He added that with the younger generations coming into the workforce, educating both generations to create harmony is important for the company to succeed. 김성민, 아리랑 뉴스.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Nearly half of the world's population is suffering from poor nutrition, meaning they're eating too much or not enough. According to the Global Nutrition Report, which surveyed and analyzed the latest data on nutrition and related health issues annually, 48% of the global population are currently overweight, obese, or underweight. The report added that at current rates, the world will fail to meet 8 out of 9 nutrition targets set by the World Health Organization for 2025. Some of the missed targets include reducing child wasting, referring to when children are too thin for their height, and child stunting, which indicate that children are too short for their age. The report estimates that nearly 150 million children under 5 years of age are stunted, while more than 45 million are wasted, and nearly 40 million are overweight. It also found that more than 40% of adults are now overweight or obese. Experts say people's diets have not improved over the last decade and are now a major threat to people's health and to the planet. Italy's Ethics Committee on Tuesday granted the country's first assisted suicide to a 43-year-old quadriplegic patient. The decision comes just a year after the patient, who was left paralyzed from the shoulders down 10 years ago, officially requested the procedure. Assisted suicide remains illegal in Italy, with anyone assisting another person to take their own life facing 5 to 12 years in jail. However, this past summer, a petition to pressure the government for a referendum on euthanasia collected over 1 million signatures, triggering the latest decision. While the latest decision to approve the country's first assisted suicide may pave the way for others, pundits say the Right to Die activists still face strong opposition from the country's Catholic Church as well as conservative Catholic lawmakers. While El Salvador is planning to build the world's first Bitcoin city, the International Monetary Fund on Monday warned the country should not use Bitcoin as legal tender, considering the risks related to the cryptocurrency. It added that given Bitcoin's high price volatility, its use as a legal tender entails significant risks to consumer protection, financial integrity, and financial stability. In September, El Salvador became the first country in the world to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender alongside the US dollar. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Lee Seung-min with the latest weather update, filling in for Lee Ji-hyun until tomorrow. Frigid conditions are persisting across South Korea. The capital region again saw minus figures for this morning. Daytime readings will go up a tad, but temperatures will feel colder than the actual readings because of the frigid wind chills. Dressing in layers will be recommended to stay warm. The capital region will be under clear skies for the remainder of the day. Western parts of the country will see a mix of light rain and snow until early afternoon. In the meantime, dry conditions are prolonging across the East Coast. Dry vegetation coupled with gusty offshore winds can create critical fire conditions. Please take extra precautions against forest fires. Daytime temperatures will be about 1 to 3 degrees lower than the seasonal average. Seoul and Chuncheon will get up to 9 degrees, Busan 14, Daejeon will make it to 13 degrees Celsius. Clear spells are expected for the time being, but conditions will feel close to winter. Next Monday, nationwide showers are in the forecast. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
Well, this is where we are going to wrap up this Wednesday edition of New Day at Arirang. Thank you for spending the last hour with us. I'm Mark Broom.
And I'm Kim Mo-gyan. Mark will be back in an hour with more news, and both of us will be here at the same time Thursday for another edition of New Day at Arirang. Till then, goodbye.
Everyone knows I'm passionate. Know why? Look at how passionate Koreans are. And you know I'm fast. Don't blink. Koreans move fast too. I'm creative on the pitch. People say I'm smart. Just look how smart Korea is. I aim to be spectacular for the fans. Why am I so fun? Is it because Korea is so much fun?